Greetings from the dark continent. Conscious Caracal here in a new form. Thank you everyone for joining in. I see there's already quite a few people in the live chat. I'm looking forward to you joining us for a very interesting... I'm looking forward to everyone joining us here for the premiere of 2019. I'm just figuring out some technical things. Seems like the audio was still on for my stream. Apologies. So yeah, that little rocky intro aside, I've got a very interesting guest here today. Some of you who've been following the channel probably already know him. Quentin Ferreira. He's my, as someone pointed out in the chat, my rocket scientist psychologist friend. He seems to not quite agree with that label. But yeah, he is, just for context, he's been the Stream of Consciousness episode where he featured was the second most popular of all the Stream of Consciousness episodes, only behind Styx, Hex, and Hammer, which I think is an episode that's going to take some effort to beat. But yeah, welcome everyone. Now I will give the mic over to Mr. Ferreira to just give you a little idea for the people that don't know him, what he's all about and what he can bring to the table in this conversation. All over to you, Mr. Quentin.
Thanks so much, Caracal. Yeah, and thanks everyone for tuning in. I just want to clarify, I'm not a rocket scientist psychologist. I'm a clinical psychologist by training. I happen to work at the European Space Agency, but I do IT stuff there. So I'm not the one who's sending stuff into space at all. But through the power of IT, things somehow land up in space despite the engineer's propensity for using Internet Explorer, which is weird. I guess I would call myself a libertarian and very interested in politics, very interested in, I guess, politics as being downstream from culture in a way and human consciousness. And yeah, that's what I hope to bring to our discussion tonight.
Well, welcome on the 11th episode of Stream of Consciousness. And thank you everyone again for joining us tonight. I think you're in for a very interesting discussion. So I would just like to start off the show with a quote here that I got. Some of you in my audience might not agree with him on everything. I myself have a lot of disagreements with him, but he makes a good point here in this tweet. So it comes from Sam Harris, the famous atheist, and he says, total commitment to an ideology becomes indistinguishable from psychopathy, and it doesn't seem to matter what the ideology is. And I think that just that idea is going to form the foundation of our conversation today. The idea of when does devotion to an ideology or belief and support of an ideology cross the line into almost like a dogmatic religion or psychopathy, if you will. And now I'm just going to, let's get the conversation started with Quentin from that quote or from that idea of ideology kind of verging on the line of commitment to ideology verging on the line of psychopathy. Do you have any comments on that idea or anything to add?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting quote. I don't know what he means when he says psychopathy, because when I think about that, generally I tend to think of, someone who's lacking in empathy and has almost no moral compass. But I would rather say that the commitment to an ideology is a dysfunction in the moral compass. It's taken morality too far, where you see yourself as the moral arbitrator of the world and your enemies as amoral and probably worth destroying. So I guess that's maybe where the lack of empathy might come in. But I do think underneath that is a moral component that drives people to a dogmatic or even a form of zealotry, let's say religious zealotry. And yeah, it's dangerous. And I think we're in one of those cycles where it's becoming increasingly polarized right now.
Because from my point of view, just reading history, if you go far back, you'll see that usually, well, it used to be that religion was a big driving force behind what made people passionate or what gave them a drive in life and what kind of formed their entire worldview. But then somewhere along the line, this beast of ideology kind of became more prominent from what I saw. And even to an extent where after the Great Enlightenment and after the Renaissance, and Nietzsche talked about this quite a lot, is the idea of as we became more secular in terms of our society and our communities, ideology became more prominent. And I do think those two phenomena are linked. The idea of that there's this God-shaped hole that's being filled by something else that kind of gives you the same, fulfills the same roles, but it's empty. It's a false promise. It's a false God. Ideology is not giving you any fulfillment. It's giving you a pseudo fulfillment almost. It's not really feeding your spirit. Any comments on that take of mine in terms of a historical perspective?
Yeah, I agree 100% with that. Nietzsche said that God is dead, and I used to read that as kind of a triumphant statement on the age of reason and enlightenment. I thought, okay, God is dead. It means now we go for rationality and we replace the metaphysical with the physical. But actually, that's not quite the end of what he was talking about. He said God is dead, and he was actually lamenting the fact that we've done this. And his whole idea was that because we've killed God, we've killed that which orientates us towards the form of the good, towards meaning. And we would either vacillate between nihilism and totalitarianism since we've killed God, unless we can replace it with, as you said, a new spiritual approach to our inner life and to the world around us.
Yeah, that's pretty much in line with how I see it as well. I think it's one of the most famously or infamously misunderstood quotes in philosophy. I don't think people really understand it. It's a quote that's been taken over by like edgy high school atheists, thinking that it's just that little piece, but it's actually one big paragraph.
Yeah, that's how I interpreted it initially as well. So, yeah.
But you did touch on something very interesting at the beginning, where when you were talking about psychopathy, the idea of psychopathy or whatever, the idea of wanting to destroy your enemies, the idea of you want to rid the world of those who are not part of your ideology or your dogmatic ideological religion, if you will. And I think, even though he says it's a joke, I think that's pretty evident, or in what that joke that Daniel Friedman made a while back, where he said, on a panel on how to deal with white right wingers, his first answer in what he says in a jestful manner was, "We just kill them." And I think that was pretty much, just from my very limited knowledge of the unconscious and psychoanalysis, that reminds me of the idea of the unconscious kind of leaking through, where your more base, like, unconscious instincts take over your reason, and you actually are brutally honest about how you see the world, or what you how you think the world should be. And I think that was on display there, just from my own personal take on it. And I think that's the idea of what we're seeing a lot on the left and the right today, with this hyperpolarization that we're seeing all across the world, is that the other side, firstly, if you can't kill them because it's against the law, you just have to silence them. The idea of that's the next best thing, where if we can just, I'm all for freedom of speech, but, and then there's this big footnote, where you want to publicly discuss ideas, but some ideas you don't want to discuss publicly. So you have a limited support of freedom of speech. So the interesting thing for me is that I do think a lot of the hatred, when you are possessed by ideology, as the title of the stream says, the hatred comes from, you want to literally destroy your opponents. You want to rid the public space of them. And because in modern society, it's not that easy to just go out and, like, as in the old days, where you just, through violence and coercion, silence your opponents. The next best thing is to send an internet mob after them, or to threaten them by contacting their employers, or doxing them, or doing something that doesn't really break the law, but it still has that same effect of silencing your opponents. And I do think that's what we're seeing manifest. The primal lizard brain instinct is to destroy them, to silence them, while the more civil thing that comes out, the action translation of it, is just then to try and silence them. So you don't kill them, you just make sure they can't put their opinions out there.
I'm glad you mentioned the lizard brain, because this reminds me of something I thought that was very important to touch on.
Mm.
So if we look at how our consciousness and how our psyche is structured, basically you have what Daniel Dennett calls competencies without comprehension. If you think of your consciousness as like the user interface of a computer, there are a whole bunch of processes running in the background that you don't have complete access to, right? So your perceptual processes, your senses, you kind of have an indirect access to them, but you're not quite aware of how your eyes are turning the sort of light into something meaningful that you can perceive and orient yourself in the world. Those processes are unconscious. And there's this, there's two complementary systems that underpin the autonomic nervous system, the behavioral activation and behavioral inhibition system. And the behavioral activation system is what moves you towards a goal, and behavioral inhibition system moves you away from something. Behavioral activation system is very involved with the dopamine system of neurotransmitters. So our brain is structured to orientate us towards something in a very, very deeply unconscious level. But we've sort of outgrown the stimulus response aspect of survival, because now we're higher primates. We have a huge cerebral cortex, and now we have a symbolic way of understanding the world through thought and language. So we've got this drive towards things, and we had in the past filled this with religion and with myth, because that kind of organized and cohered our society around a shared pathway, a shared past and a shared future. And yeah, the fact that this is built on the lizard brain means that it touches on very primal emotions. And I think one of the primal emotions that are involved in the ideological possession is the emotion of disgust. So it's really about inhibiting an action and trying to cleanse the community or cleanse the society of something that's unclean and that could infect you. And when you are disgusted by something, it doesn't evoke a sense of empathy. It evokes a sense of kill it now. And yeah, this is where I sort of see something going. And yeah, it kind of came up in, I do feel like you're right in your assessment of Mr. Friedman. He seems disgusted by white right-wingers. I don't know if he could define that, but I guess it's anyone to the right of himself. And yeah, a part of him might want to enact that wish of cleansing them from the population.
But that's the interesting thing, is that with this, well, I'm seeing from a personal perspective, I'm seeing a lot more people in the public sphere being possessed by ideology. Now, maybe I should just clarify this. Being possessed by ideology does not necessarily mean that you just have a strong opinion in terms of an ideology. Being possessed in a metaphorical sense by almost like a demon is the idea of that this controls your every being, every fiber of your body, every opinion that you have, every action that you take kind of is based on this possession. The idea of when you're speaking to someone, when you meet a new person, the ideological demon within you compels you to firstly figure out what they believe ideologically. It compels you to think, is this, like you said, someone I should be disgusted by or someone that I should help? And I think that's something we see a lot more of today in the practice of guilt by association. So before a lot of people follow someone on social media or interact with someone, they'll see who this person associates with. Within what sphere does this person operate? Does he play for the blue team or the red team or the green team? And then they determine whether this person is worth their time or not. And this gets back to that idea of the lizard brain. I mean, we are programmed as humans to be energy conserving. So if you are possessed by ideology, of course, why would you want to waste your time talking to someone that plays for the other team? So I think what we're seeing is that a lot of people, through, for example, the creation of echo chambers, is that the idea of when you are surrounded by people that just agree with everything you say, they don't challenge you on anything. I mean, that's easy. Then you don't have to even use your brain. Then you can just cruise. You can just put on cruise mode, almost like autopilot. And when you go into a conversation with someone, you can just nod and pat them on the back, and they pat you on the back, and they stroke your ego, you stroke theirs. It's a fun time. And I can understand why that is very appealing to a lot of people. And I think the internet is just multiplying that phenomenon by 10 or 100, where you can, and I mentioned this in my reveal video, the idea of you can now just get to a point where you can specifically tailor who you are exposed to, what type of opinions you are exposed to. You can just get completely indulge yourself in what the perfect word would be, echo chamber. You just follow people you agree with. You just interact with people you agree with. And that creates this false sense of I'm right and the rest of the world, anyone who disagrees is wrong. And why should I give a platform to people that are wrong?
Yeah, there's also that idea of, human beings as tribal animals. And I think it certainly plays out in that sense. You really do form a close bond to people who believe the same things as you do. But not only that, you form this sort of opposition to another point of view. And I think this guilt by association thing, I really hate that game, because I think we're seeing this on alternative media. I believe alternative media is having conversations about the frame of conversations, so kind of a meta conversation, where we're discussing how mainstream narratives are being foisted upon us by the media, and how people that diverge from these narratives are silenced. And we do see this also, with the banning of certain conservative voices, especially on Twitter. So I really think that the tribalistic nature of us is playing out a lot. I've kind of lost my train of thought there for a sec.
Well, that's the thing. In the internet frontier, or in the internet arena, your tribe is almost seen as your ideology. So it's capitalists versus communists. It's white nationalists versus Antifa. It's centrists versus far left or far right. So a lot of people are kind of retreating to their little ideological bubbles, seeing as back in the D, all the way hundreds of years back, when we were more tribal in a literal sense, in terms of literal tribes, we were pretty much everyone in your tribe shared your ideology. Everyone in your tribe shared your values. That's why you were a tribe, and that's the only way you'd survive. I mean, if everyone in a tribe back in that time didn't agree in terms of what everyone's role was, I mean, that tribe would be dysfunctional. So I see what I see today happening is that we're creating little tribes online as well. Now, a lot of people looking at the bigger picture might say, oh, it's the white tribe versus the black tribe versus the whatever. But for me, it's more down to ideology in terms of core values, in terms of it's people that are banding together that support freedom of speech. It's people banding together that support gun rights. It's people banding together that support capitalism or communism or whatever. And that's the new tribal spectrum that we're seeing today from my perspective. The idea of people are coalescing around like very core values of should someone be allowed to defend themselves with a gun? Should someone be allowed to say whatever they want? Should someone be allowed to completely live off the grid and not pay taxes? Things like that. Very extreme views, some of them, depending on from what angle you look at them. But it seems to me, and I might be wrong, and I want your thoughts on this would be very interesting. The idea of people coalescing around very core ideas. It seems like if you are on the right or on the left, you have to have some core values in common. You can't be on the left and not, mainstream trendy left, and not support like the progressive dogma of white privilege and the inverted pyramid of privilege, the idea of oppression, the idea of that if you are of this group, you are oppressing this group, therefore you are put in this position on the oppression pyramid or the oppression Olympics. And what I'm seeing is something very interesting and very troubling, is that the far right are a fringe movement. They're not mainstream. You're not hearing far right views on Fox News, but you are hearing far left views on CNN and on News 24 and in The Citizen. Mainstream.
And in universities as well. I mean,
yeah, of course. Well, that's the other thing. It's not just the media, it's also academia. So, yeah, I'm done with my little ramble. Do you have anything to add to that thought?
Yeah, I was actually thinking about the guilt by association aspect. I mean, and I do feel like there is sort of another ground of tribe that's being played out, where free speech does sit at the center, but our old distinctions of left and right don't really apply. I think people, like you say, are coalescing around sort of core values. Free speech, I would say another core value is decentralization versus centralization, small government versus big government. In the West, I would say there is another movement from secularity towards intersectional theocracy, because certain religions have, as you say, a position on the pyramid of oppression. And so we were seeing kind of people saying, well, okay, I support freedom of religion, but that means we need secular constitutions. And other people are saying, well, there are certain religious groups in these countries that are oppressed, and therefore their religion needs to be given special treatment. And that's also quite a worrying trend. So, yeah, I don't see this playing out very well unless we can start having more conversations about our conversations, about what are the frames of our discussion. Because, like, let me use this example of the Disrupted Land documentary. When AfriForum mentioned Verwoerd and said that Verwoerd was a philosopher. Now, a part of me kind of thought, well, they're talking about Verwoerd, but they didn't disavow him overtly. And then I wondered, okay, well, why do I expect that conversation to have in it a disavowal? Like, why do I expect to have a conversation about a factual? I mean, this was a man's ideas. This was what he believed he was going to achieve by implementing the system he achieved. And then I need, for some reason, a caveat as to, okay, but he was a really bad guy, and he was very evil, and he was a white supremacist. And it's kind of because the frame of our ability to have a conversation has been dominated for so long by people on the left. And I'm not trying to dismiss the entire left outright, because I do believe that there are certain values that the left can bring that are necessary to a functional society. But we've gone too far. And some kind of counterbalance has to be reached. And I think this is kind of, we see this with the election of Trump, with Brexit, people pushing back against this kind of thing. But unless we articulate the new values that we're going to start discussing, we're going to just see people moving further and further apart. And it's like we're talking different languages sometimes. Like when someone talks about white privilege, I kind of think I know what they mean, but I would just want to know, do they just mean an economic situation in a particular place because of previous laws that were in place, or do they mean that everything that white people have is unearned, therefore the state needs to come and intervene and deprivilege them and distribute that privilege more equally? So I think we can have a frank conversation about, in South Africa at least, the economic disparities between races. But if we're going to frame the conversation as a conversation about white privilege, we're having the conversation on the radical left's terms. And this is why I get very, very pissed off about that, because I feel like some people don't understand the origin of that term. They don't understand that when a person talks about white privilege, if they complete the circle, they're talking about therefore white people have unearned position in society, therefore the state must step in, remove what is unearned and redistribute it. They don't complete that circle. They go and say, oh, well, look at South Africa. White people have had economic advantages. Okay, and that's white privilege. No, it's not. You don't even understand the degree to which you're ideologically possessed if you use that term.
No,
Make sense?
You made quite a few very good points. I see the chat is definitely agreeing with you to a large extent. I just saw someone make a very good point here. Let me just go up again. Yeah, so Stoned Ape Hypothesis said, if corporate companies were nationalistic, it would affect their profits. Corporates have to be liberal, to be inclusive, to profit for profit's sake. And then Mark Doppelganger replied, I disagree. Companies follow the mainstream. If nationalism was mainstream, they would be for it. Plus minus the matter of offshoring for cutting costs. And I have to say, I agree with Mark there. The idea of if you can take it to the extreme, if far-right views were mainstream and the majority of people in society agreed with far-right views, corporations would fully embrace that type of ideology, no doubt. If it was profitable to sell Hitler shirts, people would do that. If it was like extremely profitable and they didn't get a big backlash against it, companies would be falling over to satisfy that market. So I have to, in that debate or that little conversation I saw there, I have to agree with Mark there. Companies mirror the mainstream opinion rather than other way around, where mainstream opinion is affected by companies, even though it does happen a little bit vice versa. And I saw someone here ask what brand of beer I'm drinking. It's Lion Lager, the pride of South Africa. So yeah, there's that question answered. But yeah, what do you think on that question? Where do you fall in terms of companies and ideology and what we see on a corporate level?
Yeah, I like that tweet that went viral. I believe it was by a psychologist. I can't remember his first name, but his surname is Routledge. And he said, we're living in an era of woke capitalism where we sell products to people who want socialism, you know. And yeah, I do think that obviously corporations have the profit motive in mind, and they sort of go with whatever they believe to be the cultural zeitgeist. And I mean, I agree with you, and I'm very glad that the far right has not been in the ascendancy, but we haven't kept an eye on our left flank. And we're getting to a point where, literally the corporations, big tech especially, is now going to censor people on the conservative side of things. We had this Nike and Colin Kaepernick debacle, and, you know, the corporation selling social justice that would have been anathema to the left of 20 years ago. You know, they would have been totally against this kind of corporations aligning with their interests. They were all for the rights of the little guy.
Yeah, and I mean, corporate censorship now being supported by the left is the most bizarre thing in this whole zeitgeist of this time. It's so bizarre. The idea of now the left is basically arguing, oh, Facebook and Twitter are private companies. They can do what they want. I mean, I don't think they understand the role that social media plays. It's like you getting banned and not being able to use your phone line because you have the wrong opinions. Social media and the internet have become so integral to our society and our communication that it's no longer just because there's no alternative. There's no real alternative to Facebook. There's no real alternative to Twitter. There's no real alternative to YouTube. There are little companies trying, but as they found out, a lot of them have folded into, like, I think it was VidMe tried to be an alternative to YouTube, and they just realized it's much harder and much more expensive than they thought. So yeah, I don't think that Facebook and Twitter and all these big social media giants should be allowed to just ban anyone willy-nilly without really breaking their terms of service. I mean, if they have a clear-cut terms of service and you break it, I mean, you signed that contract when you signed up. But when you see, and I've seen so many cases of this, people getting banned and not getting a reason, they didn't even break the terms of service, that's when I get cautious. That's when I realize maybe there should just be kept an eye kept an eye on these companies in terms of they have such a big influence. If you want to talk foreign intervention or meddling with elections, look no further than social media. I mean, just look what Twitter chooses to trend, what YouTube chooses to trend or not to trend. And then you'll see that there's a lot more influence coming from these corporate entities than from some troll farm in Russia that convinced like 5 people to change their vote.
I think if we can tie this back, the social media echo chamber and the banning of one side, we can tie this back to, I guess, the idea of memes, because the way that religion or meaning spread is via memes. It was and memes can be emergent in the sense that they can come from a bottom-up situation. It kind of, the culture starts to tell stories about itself, starts to say, we are the people from the mountain, and on this mountain Moses went and got these rules, and we cohered around these shared values, and we told the story through generations and generations, and it kind of helped us to orientate our way in the world. Or we can get these ideas from a top-down point of view without even realizing. We go online, and if certain opinions are considered too extreme, I mean, the opinion that a country should have closed borders, for instance, is considered too extreme, you never hear that. And you only ever hear one side of the thing. And over time, and with enough exposure to these units of information, these memes are the genes of cultural evolution. If you can only hear these types of arguments happening, you won't even be able to think outside of that framework anymore. It becomes impossible to orientate yourself in a different way. And to me, that's the most troubling thing about censorship, is that we think in language. And if we censor things, we rob people of the linguistic tools that they need to perceive their world.
No, I completely agree. I just saw, just on a lighter note, someone here in the chat said, Sumirkat RSA said, Quentin looks like a porra. What is your comment on that very controversial remark?
I am an avowed and proud porra.
You just don't own a fish and chip shop.
No. But my dad was a butcher. He did own a butchery. And my family has been in all... Yeah, I know, man. I spent a lot of young days making biltong and boerewors.
Oh, yeah.
And it was good times. It was, and, I want to just do a quick plug, because I asked for some Portuguese people, and if there are any out there, to make some Porra testimonial videos and share them on social media. I'm serious about that. I need that stuff, guys.
Right. Let's do a proper plug, just for some context. I saw you made that video relating to that Porra testimony idea, and it got some nice traction, but you didn't get all the maybe responses that you wanted. Maybe just you can use this platform right now, just give some context to the people that don't know what that was about and what you want to achieve through it. I'll give you 2 or 3 minutes so you can just give a very thorough, proper plug.
Okay, thanks, Caracal. Yeah, well, basically the idea behind the Porra testimony is that there are groups in South Africa, the Portuguese are one. I know that there are business people and capitalists in every community, but for me, growing up as Portuguese, I mean, everyone I knew had someone whose family was in some kind of business: fruit and veg, Nando's, bottle stores, butcheries. I know I'm stereotyping, but it really is the case. Similar among the Greek community, similar among many of my friends in the Indian community as well. And I want to have people that are creating jobs and contributing to the economy to tell their stories, because I feel like in South Africa, capitalism is a dirty word, as we know. So we need to hear people tell their side of things about how they create jobs, how they get up so early and work to provide the goods and services that really make the country tick. And the Porra testimony is about getting that word out there. It is tied, of course, to the ZACP. I am unashamedly supporting them. I'm wearing the purple today in solidarity with my purple cows out there. And I want the Porra testimony to open the door for people who own businesses or are in business or who are employing people to tell everyone that, hey, capitalism is a good thing. Capitalism is what South Africa needs. We need to grow the economy. And it's people like that, no matter how small the business, no matter how big the business, you guys are the ones that we rely on to get everything that we need. And we need to fight the idea that you don't deserve what you earn. I guess that's it.
Well, that's a very admirable and ambitious goal you have there, and all the best support to you. I hope you get some success now. Well, now that you have a plug on my show, those responses are going to be streaming in.
So, I hope so,
yeah, to get back to the topic that we're discussing, I want to raise the question to you. In an age of ideological possession, and maybe before I ask the question, just for context, I do believe if you look at history, we always go through periods of ideological possession and polarization where more and more people become more rabid in terms of how they view the world and how they view their ideological opponents. And I think you see it, I think the most recent example would be the Cold War. And now we're finding ourselves in a different time that we're not that used to. A lot of people talk about it as if it's unprecedented. We're living in an unprecedented polarization or ideologically possessed time. I don't agree. I think life goes through waves. You go through these phases. So then on the back of that context, I want to pose you the question, what is the antidote to ideological possession? How do you exercise this demon from a psychology point of view?
Yeah, look, to reorient yourself away from ideology, you really have to reconstruct the building blocks of meaning in your life. And I know that sounds very, very nebulous. So I am a practitioner of existential psychotherapy. It's one of my therapeutic modalities. And in existential psychotherapy, you see certain themes emerging. The theme of death is very prominent. The theme of isolation, the theme of freedom, and the theme of meaninglessness and meaning. And I guess in facing the inevitability of death, in facing the fundamental isolation that we have as human beings, I can connect with you, I can be with you for a moment, I can try to make myself known to you, and you can try to make yourself known to me, but we can never really know one another deeply enough. And then on top of that, you add the layer of freedom, which is the freedom to do everything, but not freedom from responsibility for our actions. And the freedom to choose is very paralyzing because there's so many things to choose, but also such a small window of time to choose them in. And I think you have to reconcile yourself with the meaning and meaninglessness of life. I mean, when you're confronted with loss, with death, with grief, the way out of that is to, find something else that can take up what you've lost and can help you orient yourself and move forward in the world. So Jordan Peterson talks about, in his 12 rules for life, about how the antidote to chaos he outlines his 12 rules, but I really do think it's about looking within and challenging yourself on those four themes of existence that I mentioned. I think that will start to help people moving away, because once you realize that your time is finite, that you need to connect with people, that you need to have a meaningful direction in your own personal life, and that you are free but responsible to make choices. I feel like when you've kind of got that going right in your life, you're less likely to be ideologically possessed or need the God-shaped hole filled in a way.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very good answer. It approaches the problem from an angle that I haven't really considered that thoroughly. But it actually, now that I think about it while you were talking, I think you're onto something in terms of that whole, that idea of the people that are ideologically possessed. And again, this is completely purely from my own personal experience with people that are ideologically possessed, it is usually people struggling to find meaning. It's people that are unhappy, people that are not getting the satisfaction and the fulfillment from their own personal lives, from their friends and family, from their own personal achievements, from their own goals. And then and again, just from the people that I know, what it seems, a common symptom seems to be that they find meaning and purpose in their ideology.
Right.
They decide that, for example, let's take actually, now that I think about it, the New Zealand shooter is actually a very good example. Someone that didn't have that meaning in their lives, but they had this purpose. Now, that purpose might be as deranged as you might think or might argue. It's still, that individual still convinced himself that he needed to kill himself. Well, not kill himself, but take out quite a few people and do something absolutely atrocious to achieve a certain type of goal. And that would give his life meaning. That would give his life purpose. And I think that's something that not a lot of people consider, is the idea of these radicals on left and the right, to me, seem like individuals desperate for meaning, desperate for fulfillment, desperate for satisfaction in their lives. And if they can bring about their utopia, whether that utopia be an alt-right white ethno-state or a leftist Marxist utopia, that end goal, if I can help the world achieve, get one step closer to that goal, that utopia, then I would have had meaning, then I would have had a purpose. And I think that's something we're seeing a lot in terms of people that are down and out, people that are struggling to find any type of satisfaction from their lives, people that are struggling to find meaning, finding meaning and a reason to live almost in ideology, in terms of, I really don't have anything going for me, but at least if I can help achieve this utopia that this ideology promises, then I would have made a difference in the world. It's almost as if ideology preys on our almost inherent need to change the world, especially young people. That's why the majority of people possessed by ideology are young people, youth, that I've seen are people in their early 20s, late 20s maybe, that are just looking for some way to change the world, leave their imprint on the world, and to make a difference. And if that difference can be brought about through radical means, they are willing to do it because the ends justify the means. But if you have done any reading, Aldous Huxley, whose book I have here on my shelf, says that the ends can possibly justify the means because the means influences the nature of the ends produced. So if you try to achieve a noble end through unjust means, that will taint the end in the end, to put it in a certain way.
What you just said reminded me kind of this sort of inversion of the Jungian archetype of the hero, or maybe even the savior. You know, someone who is, and if you understand Jung, one of his main assertions was that our conscious attitudes and behavior serve a compensatory function for our unconscious mind, or our unconscious attitudes. So the New Zealand shooter, as an example, saw himself as a savior and tried to enact through violence the salvation of what he would think is Western civilization. And if I look at that unconsciously, it's because, he might have been longing for this savior, someone to come in and say, hey, here is meaning. Here is a solution to what you're looking for. Here is some real connection. Here is some freedom or some responsibility that you might not have had. And it's very interesting that he chose, to do such a violent act in order to save other people. It's almost like an inversion of the crucifixion, you know. You kill the hero to save humanity. And I think the psychological significance of this atrocious murder spree is not lost on many observers out there.
I think it was you and me that had the conversation in terms of what influences a man to commit an atrocity like this. And I think the point that you made was that, I mean, isn't it obvious if you look at, for example, the stories you are told when you are little, as some Western stories, the idea of the hero, the idea of some noble spirit just manifesting, showing up and solving all the problems through immense self-sacrifice, making the big decisions that the common man is too cowardly or too weak to make. Someone that is almost like a messianic figure that's willing to take the burden of the world and carry it. And I can see how a psychopath can look at those stories and draw inspiration from it and do something absolutely atrocious. But still, and this might be a hard thing to grasp for a lot of people, still doing it from the angle of, I'm doing what needs to be done. I'm doing something that's serving the moral good. I'm not doing something just to be evil. I'm doing something because I'm the only person brave enough to do it. And I think that's why, and that kind of links back to this whole debate about history. The idea of looking at history very one-dimensional in terms of, on one hand, you have these perfect, incorruptible saints, and they're fighting these mustache twirling villains that just wake up every morning thinking, how can I make the world a worse place today? How can I oppress people today? But that's a very inaccurate image. That's not how history is. History is between a bunch of bad guys thinking they're the good guys.
Yeah.
It's a bunch of people thinking they're doing what needs to be done. And then the victors in the end write the history books. And we look, because it's easy to look at history like a film, to look at it like, in a narrative sense, evil versus good. And yeah, that's the end of my rant.
I think the what you're saying reminds me of the ANC a lot, because to me, it's kind of like the ANC has convinced people that there wasn't even a world before apartheid, that there was always apartheid. It's actually something that I'm quite obsessed with at the moment, this idea of the eternal apartheid. And so I'm just going to say apartheid because I know I'm not talking to Americans out there. The eternal apartheid, because they've set themselves up as the saviors from these mustache twirling Afrikaners. And any conversation that happens outside of the frame of the eternal apartheid is immediately shut down. And you cannot have a dialogue where perhaps the ANC are the oppressors. I mean, given we've had 25 years of basically them moving more and more and more towards socialism and the National Democratic Revolution. But any challenge to this, their rewriting of history, their sort of oversimplification of what was a very complex clash of cultures, is immediately sidelined. And something that's really been worrying me was this judgment at the Human Rights Commission on the hate speech of Julius Malema, because if we have a conversation about a frame of discussion, how we can now frame discussions, or how they've now legislatively framed discussions in South Africa, is that we look at the race of the people having the discussion. And if the race of those people is from the previously oppressed class, they can frame a discussion in terms of violence. And
right.
Obviously, the political link between violence has always been part of the political frame in the left on South Africa, the left and right, but in South Africa especially. I mean, the ANC, the People's War, it was a violent revolution. So what they're saying is violence is condoned in this frame over here. Violent imagery, violent metaphors, and even calls to violence are a legitimate form of discourse in this frame. And in the frame of people who are of the previous oppressed or oppressors, they cannot have a frame of that kind of means. So we have to be very, very careful. And I feel like we as individuals have the responsibility not to talk in their frame. We have to have a conversation about their frame, and we have to talk outside of their frame. And as much as it puts ourselves at risk I suppose I shouldn't talk about putting oneself at risk because I am not at the moment at any risk. But people back home who do talk outside the frame are at risk of losing their jobs or worse. Yeah, and I admire you, man, because you've revealed yourself now. You're actually you and having a conversation about this frame that we're not supposed to have a conversation about. So I just want to say kudos to you, and I hope everyone else can take some inspiration from that, because it really takes balls to do what Caracal's done.
Well, yeah, that's the thing. I revealed my identity. Oh, it's going on to a completely different topic. Well, maybe not. The idea of one of my core values is consistency and transparency. So, me working for AfriForum now, starting to work this year, I would not be able to justify staying anonymous based on my core principles. I would not be able to make a pro AfriForum tweet or pro AfriForum video if I knew that my audience didn't know I was working for the organization. So the thing is, and I think that's where a lot of people might be putting the cart before the horse, I don't make pro AfriForum tweets because I work for AfriForum. I work for AfriForum because I support their values and support their mission. I can't see myself working for an organization that I didn't agree with or that I didn't support. So it's a huge honor for me getting the job after applying. And yeah, it's made a big difference in my life. I remember after posting that video where I revealed my identity a few minutes later, I'm like, what the fuck did I just do?
Yeah.
Can't put that genie back in the box. But yeah, it's unrelated, but there's a joke I wanted to tell earlier when we were talking about just left and right wing that I read yesterday, where they said the joke goes like, a plane just went down over the ocean and Ben Shapiro was on board and it went down because he destroyed the left wing. And I saw here in the chat, Meerkat RSA says Malema sings "Kill the Boer" with a hard R. Yeah, man. Let's see. I'm just checking the chat a bit. I've been neglecting them since the beginning. People just seem to be in agreement. Mark just said, "Yeah, left wing destroyed." But that's the thing. Again, I can take that same point that I made about history, where history is not just good guys versus bad guys, and I can extend it to ideologies. I don't think all communists are evil. I don't think all communists are idiots. They might be misinformed, but I know a lot of people that are like far left or communists that are pretty damn smart. They just have a different worldview to me. And they think I'm pretty stupid, or might even think I'm pretty smart. I'm just misguided. So they might say the exact same thing about me. But a point that I'd like to make, me, far right Caracal. Oh shit! Wait, I can't even make that joke because it seems like my detractors don't understand. They pretend not to understand sarcasm.
Yeah,
selective. There will be like a headline: self-professed far righter.
They're going to take this exact clip.
But yeah, even me, I can see that left and right is not a battle between good versus evil. I think there's some pretty good people on the left and the right, and some pretty evil people on the left and the right. People that just want to see the world burn for their own, because they are possessed by ideology. They would rather have a burning world than a world that doesn't have their utopia. If they fail, they'd rather just push if they fail to bring about their utopia, they would rather just push the self-destruct button if they had that option.
It's fundamentally nihilistic.
A lot of hats in the chat. Ladybird says they are rewriting history. Oh, well, depends on who you're talking about. Can't remember. I saw a tweet today. I didn't retweet it, but I found it very interesting. A guy that said, we're living in a time where our perception of history is influenced by a bunch of leftists writing brochures to a time they never experienced, or tourist brochures to the past. JC Miller asks, what will you be doing for AfriForum? I'm working in their communication department in terms of campaigning and strategy. Mark Doppelganger asks, or no, he says, I disagree. One is responsible for being informed, and if being seriously misinformed makes you do evil deeds for no evil reasons, that's still on the misinformed person. It's a very interesting opinion, Mark. The idea of, now actually, Quentin, I'd like to ask you, what do you think about that idea of, and I'll just repeat it, where he says, one is responsible for being informed, and if being seriously misinformed makes one do evil deeds for no evil reasons, that is still on the misinformed person. They still carry the blame.
I really like paradoxes. And this particular paradox makes me think of, it sounds like Mark is someone who believes in an absolute truth. And if you do believe in an absolute truth, I believe you approach things with doubt, because you can never really feel sure that you're approaching the truth. And so I don't think it's necessarily about being misinformed or not. I think it's about not approaching your search for truth from the point of view that you could be wrong, and leaving some room and some flexibility to change your opinion and to change your mind and to change the way you see things. I feel like if you do believe in truth, you will pursue truth, and that means being honest about when you're wrong. If you can't do that and you stick to an ideologically possessed framework, whether you're incorrect or incorrect in your basic assumptions about human beings, it doesn't really matter. Your end will be the same, because you haven't given yourself, or you haven't been honest with yourself about the fact that, hey, you're infallible, and you're ultimately going to be responsible for the consequences of your infallible or your fallible perspectives on things.
Yeah, Mark has just replied to you in the chat. He says, I do believe in absolute truth, but also that one can't know it fully, only approach it ever closer. And I think that's, I completely agree in terms of, I think it was Karl Popper that said, the fool claims to possess the truth. The man of science simply pursues it.
Nice. I like that.
And I think that's the thing, the idea of, can you really, it's one of the biggest cliches there is, but it's so damn true. The saying that the road to hell is paved with good intentions. The idea of probably some of the most evil people you can think of probably thought, and we touched on this earlier, that they were doing what needs to be done. Maybe not the morally right thing, but rather morally right in the bigger picture, but morally right according to them from their perspective. Because I don't think morality is written on some stone tablet drifting through space somewhere that we can discover. I think it's really dependent on our environment. And because we're humans, because we're fallible, that actually brings me to a thing that I've realized, and I regret that I realized it a bit too late. Well, not too late, but a bit late in my life, was the idea of, if you really want to figure out, if you want to determine what someone's opinion or political leaning is going to be, you just ask them the simple question, do you think humans are inherently evil or inherently good? And based on their answer, I can give you a pretty well-educated guess in terms of where they fall on the political spectrum and what their views are on many core issues. Do you agree or disagree?
Yeah, I agree with that. I feel like, a utopian idealist has this, to my mind, a naive view of human nature, because they believe that it can be socially engineered to fit whatever the goals of that particular utopian society is. And yeah, on the other hand, people who believe in that human beings are inherently bad believe that also using the state to act as a moral arbitrator and to force people in line is the way to go. And I like the horseshoe theory, as the left and right kind of get further towards the extremes, they do tend to converge around a totalitarian way of viewing things. I think your question covers both sides of that horseshoe, but inevitably if you believe people are good or you believe that they're evil, it does require some sense of, or some authoritarian force to bring them in line to however you can mold them.
Well, that's the idea. I personally believe people are inherently evil, but we have the potential to be good. And that, from a personal perspective, shapes a lot of my political opinions in terms of, I always use the example of, you don't teach a child how to lie or how to steal or how to do any malicious act. You teach a child not to lie, not to steal, not to do any malicious act or be violent. And that shows to me that our inherent nature is flawed. Our inherent nature is evil, if you can use that word. But we can be better. We have the potential to be better. But it's not going to just come automatically. It's going to come through a lot of blood, sweat, and tears. You form yourself into a good person. You are not born a good person, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is making me think in a Freudian sense. And I don't like to do that because I'm not so much of a Freudian. I'm more like a Jungian. But, Freud had the idea that our primary drives are sex and aggression. And really, okay, sex is great and aggression is great in certain contexts too. But really, we have these drives towards getting what we want and procreating at will. And we have to temper those drives through socialization, through culture, through religion, or some other sense of moral arbitration. I don't know if I think human beings are inherently evil. I think good and evil are real, but they're opinions. I think the definition will change depending on the culture and the particular point in time. But human beings certainly have the capacity for both, for empathy that will put a tear to your eye when you see someone reach out and help someone else, and also complete evil that it will just disgust you to the very core of your being. We're those kind of dualistic animals.
I think I can sum it up in the statement that humans have almost an infinite potential for good and evil, an infinite potential to wreak havoc and tragedy and suffering upon the world, but also to commit acts of such great virtue and good that it almost defies logic. Yeah. And I think that's the big, like you said earlier, you like paradoxes. I think that's the big human paradox. The idea of we have this potential to be so incredibly evil, but at the same time, we can be so superhumanly good at the same time. I would say that's the big paradox that we're living every day, whether you choose to embrace your benevolent side or your potential for malice and for evil.
Yeah, and I think, I guess this goes back to what I said about reconciling yourself with these fundamental, universal problems of existence: death, meaninglessness, freedom, and isolation. There are ways of doing that which leads you towards a greater good, regardless of your religious perspective. There are ways of approaching death that can make you good or evil. There are ways of approaching your need to connect, this isolation that we have, being born into the world alone. Ways of approaching that approach the good: community, marriage, friendship, and ways of approaching that lead us down a bad path, exploiting other people, manipulating them. It still gives you the same sense of connection, but it's coming from a negative place. The drive towards meaning as well. We can have someone who finds meaning in serving others, helping people, fighting good causes in society, and then another one who finds meaning in gunning down 50 people in their place of worship. So, Solzhenitsyn has this great line, which is that the line between good and evil runs down every individual's heart. And I really like that quote, because we are responsible for the good and evil that we put into the world.
I think the entire quote goes something like, if only the world was divided up between good and evil people, then we could just isolate the evil people and cut them out like a cancer. But that's impossible, because the line between good and evil runs through the heart of every man, and no man is willing to cut out a piece of his own heart. Yeah, it's an incredible quote, man.
Beautiful. Yeah.
Just to be on topic, taking this from my bookshelf, Beyond Good and
nice.
Evil.
Yeah, that was. I read half of it. It's very tough.
Yeah. Nietzsche is notoriously tough to read. You need a bit of mental warm up before you do that marathon. But maybe I'll do it. Excuse me?
Anyone who's been translated from German originally is very tough to read.
I would say the same for the French, dude. Like, I wish I could read Albert Camus in French, dude. That would be amazing. Maybe I'll do a live stream sometime where I just go through my bookshelf, because I see quite a few questions in my chat of people wanting me to just, what's that one? Maybe I'll do that sometime. But I think we're reaching the point where we can start wrapping up. I just want to, firstly, before people start logging off, I think I'll put it in now. Thank you for everyone that tuned in. I think I already said this in my coming out video, that I really appreciate it. It means the absolute world to me. Just doesn't matter how many people tune in live, whether it be 5 or 50 or whatever. It's more than I could have ever imagined. I never saw myself being in this position where a lot of people, 25 people watching live now is a lot to me. Just this conversation between you and me is just a conversation. This sounds like a typical conversation I would have with one of my mates. But the difference here is there's an audience, which is super surreal. But again, people taking the time out of their day to sit and listen for an hour to my very, very serious point was just interrupted by reading Meerkat's message in the chat, coming out video ? That sounds pretty gay. Okay, thank you for completely derailing my sentimental train of thought. But I'm going to use this opportunity now. Quentin, taking everything into account now, what we've talked about, I'm pretty satisfied with the conversation. I think we touched on some very interesting and important points. Can you just give a final summation of a message that you would like to send out to the people still listening in terms of this very topic? How do we deal with it? And is this current environment where we are in, where we see so many people possessed by ideology, is it cause for despair, or is this just a growth pain that we need to sit through? Please give your concluding remarks. I'm pretty interested to hear the last thought that you send out before we say goodnight to the audience.
I don't know if it's a cause for despair. I think this depends on how we as individuals try to bridge the gap in our understanding of ourselves and our understanding of maybe people across from us on the political spectrum. If we cannot bridge this gap through enacting what I would say would be, and embodying what I would say would be a good form of moving forward, honesty, truth, approaching a conversation not as if the individual is completely wrong or stupid, trying to get to some kind of core of where they're coming from. If we can start to do that with one another a little bit more, and I'm guilty of the same thing as everyone else is online, but if we can understand people a little bit better, I feel like we can open the door for a much more constructive conversation. But I also want us not to play by the rules that are being set by the forces of tyranny. And if we don't even realize their game, that will be a cause for despair. I don't want to end off on a note like that, but yeah, we cannot play their linguistic game. We have to speak the truth.
And I think, well, in your defense, I think our topic for tonight wasn't really the most positive or hope-inspiring topic. So I completely understand the angle that you ended it on. maybe I can pick up the slack and end it with a more positive note. Something that I did notice in the wake of my reveal video where I revealed my identity was overwhelming support, overwhelming positive messages, and then the little tiny, excuse me, the little tiny fringe of people over there on the left screaming, "White supremacist comes out with identity." Yeah, but my point, jokes aside, was that the negativity or the malice was so tiny in terms of the reaction that it blew me away. In terms of it's literally 1% out of 100, if even that much. The vast majority. I've even had some of my detractors on Twitter tweeting at my video, replying saying that was a very admirable message, and I can't really find any fault with it. And then I also replied with the idea of thank you for the mature and friendly response. And I think if I can just inspire one or two people to be less ideologically possessed, to look at the world a bit more rationally, a bit more calmly, and a bit more unpartisan, then I would have succeeded. Then I think I've made the world a better place than I found it. And like I said in my video, that is my goal for this year. To leave this country, to leave my community, and to leave this world a more informed and a better place than I found it. And in the spirit of this conversation, the stream, to leave the world a less ideologically possessed world than I found it. And I think that's the positive note that I want to end it on, in terms of everyone that tuned in tonight, everyone that has subscribed to this channel, everyone that interacts with me on Twitter. Thank you for accepting my challenge. Thank you for going the extra mile to be the bigger persons, the bigger men and women in this world, overpopulated by people possessed by ideology, overpopulated by radicals and extremists. A lot more than I would like to see. And just seeing you fight back every day against the creeping advance of totalitarianism and authoritarianism in your own little capacity, it just gives me a lot of hope. It brightens my day to see people push back against censorship, to push back against totalitarianism, and to push back against the disarmament of regular people who just want to defend themselves. And yeah, I see there in the chat, the Ferreira Watcher says, thank you, I enjoyed the conversation. Thank you very much for tuning in. And I think that's why I'm going to end it on a positive note, to kind of counterbalance your more somber yet still true and important message at the end. Again, thank you very much for everyone that tuned in. I don't think I can completely express how much I appreciate the fact that you took an hour out of your day to listen to my conversations with a very interesting guest. And then just lastly, thank you again, Quentin, for joining us tonight and having a very interesting conversation. I thoroughly enjoyed it. The chat seems to have thoroughly enjoyed it. Meerkat RSA says, baie dankie. Rooikat. Ruan Goosen says, lekker boys, great chat. Brett Patrick says, nice job. Belville Pete says, thank you guys, awesome chat. Stoned Ape Hypothesis says,
I love that name.
Clockwork says, cheers, Rooikat, thanks. And Mark Doppelganger says, thank you all. And Stoned Ape Hypothesis says also, thank you, Quentin. So
no, thank you for having me, man. It was a very enjoyable chat.
Absolutely no problem. Just like I said, thanks to the people that tuned in for an hour. Thank you, Quentin, for giving us an hour of your time to talk about a very important and interesting topic. And I hope we can have another similar stream in the future. I look forward to it.
Thank you, Rooikat.
Okay. Cheers, guys. This is going to be the first episode in 2019 of A Stream of Consciousness. And I hope you enjoyed it. Check you on the next one, guys. Cheers, guys. Have a good one.